Ça va, vous avez bien déjeuné? Tout va bien? Ça s'est bien passé? Pas de... Vous mettez 5 étoiles sur Google pour le restaurant qui est ici, c'est cool. Merci à vous tous d'être présents. On va démarrer une super session. Je pense que vous avez beaucoup de chance. Ça ne vous a pas échappé, on est dans un environnement où la concurrence est partout, les médias sont plutôt saturés. C'est assez compliqué de tirer son épingle du jeu. Et on s'est posé une question, de se dire finalement, et si le positionnement était une solution pour vous permettre de rendre visible la valeur de votre offre, de vos services à vos clientèles. Puis le sujet, dès qu'on parle de positionnement, c'est de se dire qu'est-ce que c'est un bon positionnement finalement, et puis qu'est-ce que c'est un mauvais positionnement. On s'est dit que ça serait intéressant de vous donner quelques clés pour y voir peut-être plus clair, j'espère, et puis aussi peut-être vous livrer une méthodologie, s'il y en avait une, qui permettrait un truc un peu infaillible pour savoir si vous êtes bien calé dans la façon de positionner votre offre, vos services, votre entreprise. S'il y avait une méthode infaillible pour le faire, ça serait quoi? Et donc, on a invité quelqu'un de formidable. Elle s'appelle April Dunford. Vous ne la connaissez peut-être pas, mais c'est une experte reconnue mondialement. Elle conseille, elle a fait beaucoup de sa carrière, une grande partie de sa carrière dans la tech. Elle conseille aussi Google, Epic Games, des petites marques, hein, un peu sympa. Elle est aussi l'auteur d'un livre à succès sur le positionnement. En français, ça s'appelle « Évidemment génial ». La conférence et les échanges qu'on va avoir vont se faire en anglais. Le titre de son livre en anglais, ça s'appelle « Obviously Awesome ». Et j'aimerais, pour éviter que vous tombiez dans la traditionnelle sieste après le déjeuner, qu'après moi, vous répétiez « Obviously Awesome ». On y va? 1, 2, 3, on y va? Ça va vous réveiller. On y va? Obviously awesome. Once again, obviously awesome. Merci beaucoup. Comme vous êtes chaud, vous voulez éviter ce syndrome de la sieste, merci, je pense qu'on est arrivé. Je vais vous demander de préparer vos questions pendant l'intervention d'April et de faire, allez, une standing ovation. Vous vous levez et vous applaudissez pour April Dunford. Tout le monde se lève. April.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
The floor is yours.
Okay.
The floor is yours. Enjoy.
Great.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming to English class today. I really appreciate you. So today I'm here to talk about positioning. In my opinion, this is one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal as marketers, but it is also one of the most misunderstood. So we're going to talk a bit about that today. As mentioned earlier, I'm a positioning expert. So it's a funny thing being a positioning expert, because when you say, hi, I'm April, my expertise is around positioning, people will say, oh, I know what that is. That's exactly like messaging. No, not exactly. Or they'll say, I work a lot with tech companies, and the tech CEO will say, positioning, that's like when we make up a tagline. No, not exactly. My personal pet peeve is when people talk about brand positioning, which really bothers me because there is branding and there is positioning, but those two things are actually completely separate. In fact, almost everything on this slide comes from positioning. It's something that you do once you have your positioning, but the positioning actually has to come first. It looks a little bit like this. If everything we do in marketing and sales is the house, positioning is the foundation upon which the house is built. Now, here's my definition of positioning. So, positioning defines how our product or offering is the best in the world at providing something, some value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful of a definition, and I say that as the person who invented that definition. But one of the ways I like to think about it is it's a bit like context setting for products. Context is really important because that's how we make sense of the world, and in particular, that's how we make sense of something that we've never seen before, which is often what we have in tech companies. So I'm going to give you an example. So this is an example of a product that I once encountered completely out of context. Did you know what I thought this was? I saw this when I was searching on Amazon, and I thought, you know, Crocs makes those really ugly shoes. I thought Crocs had decided, how can we make these even more ugly? I know, we'll cut the toe out and we'll put this really ugly thing at the back, and I snipped a picture of this thing and I sent it to my friend and said, look at these ugly shoes. But then I saw it in context, and it turns out that's not what it is at all. And once I saw it in context, it became obvious what it is. What it is it's a dog muzzle, and what it's for is embarrassing your dog in public. Now, even the way context works is even just a hint of context will change the way you perceive a product. So I show you this dog thing, and then I show you this, and you might say, aha, I'm on to her now. She likes dog stuff. This is one of these things you put on your dog, you know, when he goes to the hospital or something, he comes back with that thing. It turns out, no, that's not it at all. It's actually for people. And it's for when you go to the noodle shop, so that the noodle soup doesn't, I don't know, to be honest. But the marketers, they know you're going to have this problem figuring out what it is, so they give you the context with that guy. See that guy there? That's the clue. You know what this thing is for? Is for making people fall in love with you. It doesn't work. The point is, a shift in positioning can completely transform the way we perceive a product. Now, why is this important? It's important for a few reasons. One reason it's important is because the markets that we operate in are intensely crowded, So I like to show this chart once in a while at tech conferences in particular, just to scare people about how crowded markets actually are. So this chart, there's a guy that produces this chart every year, and this one is a couple of years old, but every year he produces a chart, and what it is if you can imagine all the software in all the world to solve any problem, this chart is just the products that solve marketing problems. That's it. And look at this thing. It's a nightmare. There's 8,000 companies on that chart. I think now there's something like 10,000 companies, but I couldn't even fit it on the slide anymore in 2023. So if I'm head of marketing and I need to purchase something, how would I ever figure out what I need to pay attention to and what I don't? How do I narrow down a short list of options? There's 8,000 things to think about. So one of the ways we do this is with market categories. And you can see even the person that made this chart has attempted to make it easier for you to make sense of this by splitting things into market categories. So he's got two levels of this. There's colors, which are the macro categories, and then he's got individual little islands are the micro categories. So the red stuff is advertising and promotion, and the orange stuff is content and experience. So let's say, for example, you're a CMO or a vice president of marketing, and you decide, well, I'd like to put live chat on my website. What companies should I be looking at that do that? Well, you might look at this and say, I don't know, that sounds a little bit like social and relationships. And sure enough, there's a little island on there called conversational marketing and chat. So this is good. Now I don't have to pay attention to all 8,000. I only have to pay attention to, well, it's still a lot, to be honest, way too many, but it's not 8,000. But that's not all positioning your product in a market category does. It doesn't just narrow down the competition. It actually sets off a really powerful set of assumptions in the minds of customers about what you're all about. So it works a little bit like this. If I come and say, I have a product and it's marketing automation, or I have a product and it's customer relationship management, CRM, just by saying that and positioning myself in that market category, you'll make assumptions about who my competition is. You'll make assumptions about what the functionality of that product is, even things like pricing. So let me give you an example. I got a call from a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and he had just made an investment in a tech company, and he said, April, I love this company, I love it so much, I gave them $3 million, and the reason I invested in them is because customers really love their stuff, they love it. But you know what the problem is? Their marketing is terrible. Nobody can figure out what the heck this product does until they get using it. So they have this problem. It takes a long time to get a lead into the funnel. It takes a long time before they get a deal happening. He says, I think this might be a positioning problem. Maybe you could help them. I said, okay, yeah, well, let's talk to them. So I get on the phone with the executive team, and I said, okay, so what is your product all about? And the CEO says, well, we're lawyers, ex-lawyers, and we've made this thing, and it's email for lawyers. And I was like, email for lawyers? Who knew the lawyers needed their own email? But I'm not a lawyer, thank God. So, okay, fine, email for lawyers. We got it, email for lawyers. And so then he starts showing me a demo. So he shows me a demo, and there's a thing, and it looks like an inbox, and there's conversations going on between the lawyers and their clients. And I said, hey, that's neat. Like, how does the calendar work on this email for lawyers? And he says, oh, we don't have a calendar. I'm like, well, wait, hang on. How do you replace Gmail if you don't have a calendar? He says, we don't replace Gmail. We don't compete with Gmail at all. And I'm like, wait, so you're telling me the lawyers need 2 email systems? That's ridiculous. Like, how does that work? And I said, well, back up. Like, what is so great about your product? And they said, well, we have this thing. They had a name for it, super secure contextual file sharing. What it does is there's documents, and the lawyers and their clients need to collaborate on documents, but not everybody is allowed to have access to these documents. So this automatically figures out who should have access to the documents, puts it in a super secure place. Only the people that are allowed to have access to it have access to it. That actually sounds cool. I could see why the lawyers get excited about that. But you know what it doesn't sound like? Email. Like why I wouldn't buy email to solve that problem. So what these folks actually have is this really innovative, neat product that customers love, masquerading as crappy email that doesn't even have a calendar. So what would happen if I took this product and I picked it up? I'm not changing the product at all. I'm just going to pick it up and put it in a different context. So instead of calling it email, let's call it collaboration for lawyers. Team collaboration for lawyers. That's totally different. If I were to say it's team collaboration for lawyers, do I compete with Gmail anymore? No, I don't. I compete with Microsoft Teams or Slack. Totally different. Would I expect that product to have a calendar? No, I would not. I would expect that product to have some fancy collaboration thing that makes sense for lawyers, and that's exactly what it has, super secure, context-aware file sharing. The best part about this is they didn't change the product, they changed the positioning, and they were able to increase the price times 10 because folks are used to getting email for almost free. Team collaboration, the expectation on the pricing is a lot higher. So the point here is that we almost never position products deliberately. Quite often when I work with tech companies, the founders have an idea in their mind about what this thing is. They launch it, they add things and remove things based on what customers think about it. We fast forward a couple of years, and then all of a sudden the thing that you thought was maybe email doesn't make sense as email anymore, and people can't understand it. So we often need to check in on our positioning because it's often not obvious what the best way to position it is. So let me give you an example. So this is a company I worked with in Canada called ClearPath Robotics. And so what this company does is it makes a robot that drives around a manufacturing plant, and it delivers things from one place to the other inside a manufacturing plant. Now, if you don't know much about robotics, you might think, that doesn't seem like that's particularly hard. It turns out that's really hard. This thing is a miracle of modern technology. It's full of mapping and sensors and artificial intelligence. It's amazing. So they go to launch this product, and they do a very good job of getting meetings with people inside the manufacturing plant that purchase robots. And this is how the meetings go. They walk in, and they say, hello, we're ClearPath Robotics, and we're here to sell you some fancy new robots. And what happens is, the person that buys robots inside the manufacturing plant goes, oh, Robots. Yeah, we've been buying robots for a long time. We've been buying robots for decades. And in fact, we have improved robot vendors. And you're not one of them. And why are your robots so expensive? Because we buy lots of robots here and none of them are as expensive as that. And the company is like, no, you don't understand. These are special robots, special, amazing, innovative robots. Robots like the world has never seen before. Eventually, the CEO decided, you know what, we need to stop positioning this thing as a robot. Everybody's confused. Nobody can understand what it is. So they went back to the office and they said, well, what's so special about us? The first thing is mobility. It drives around. The second thing, it's mapping, sensors, artificial intelligence. And then they said, well, what drives around and is full of mapping and sensors and artificial intelligence? And eventually they decided, well, what this thing actually is not a robot, it's a self-driving car. So they repositioned it as autonomous vehicles for industrial uses. But it completely changed the starting point for a conversation with a customer. Of course it drives around. Of course it's technologically advanced. Of course you don't get it from the same vendor that sells you an arm that picks up a jar of vitamins and puts it in a box. And of course you're going to spend more money on that. What I really like about this example is they actually changed the industrial design of the device itself to match the positioning. So you can see this device has white headlights on the front and red tail lights on the back. It doesn't need any lights. It's a robot. But those are there just to drive home this idea that this thing is actually like a car. So why are we so bad at this? It seems like kind of a fundamental thing, positioning, and yet it also seems like people really don't understand how to do it. So this was a problem that bothered me in the early stage of my marketing career. So early in my marketing career, I got a job at a tech company, and we had something that we thought was like a spreadsheet. And eventually, we repositioned it as an embedded database for mobile devices. Very, very different positioning. As a spreadsheet, it was a total failure. As an embedded database for mobile devices, it went on to make billions of dollars in revenue. So the repositioning made a big, big difference in this. After my first experience repositioning this product, I thought, wow, I should figure out how we're supposed to do this properly. Like, you know, how do the marketers learn how to do this in marketing school? I asked myself. And so I took a bunch of courses and I read a lot of books and I had a lot of coffee meetings with very senior marketing people. And I said, look, we repositioned this database thing, but we kind of just messed around until we got something that worked. Like, how are we supposed to do this? And everybody kept pointing me to this book, which is a great book, by the way. It's called Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind by these guys, Rees and Trout. And this is a great book. What it does is it explains what positioning is and why it's important. What it does not do is tell you how to do it. So I found this very frustrating. So I was in the middle of trying to reposition the second product that I ever worked on, and we were kind of doing the same thing we did on the first one, which was we try some stuff, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, we throw it out, we try something else, and we kept doing this. This is actually a good way to get fired if you're a vice president of marketing, is just kind of mess around for 6 months until somebody says maybe you shouldn't work here anymore. So this was frustrating me, so I thought, maybe we could figure out how to actually do it and invent a methodology. So here's how we did it. So the first thing is, I figured I would approach this a bit like an engineering problem, in that we would take positioning, split it into its component pieces, solve for the component pieces, and then once we had that, we could put it together and voila, good positioning. So it was easy to split it into component pieces because we kind of agree on what the component pieces of positioning are. There's 5 things. The first one is competitive alternatives. So if a customer didn't use us, what would they use? The second thing is unique attributes or capabilities. In technology products, these are the features of our product or the features of the company that no one else has. The next thing is value. Companies don't actually buy your product for features. They buy it for the value that those features enable. So what's the value that we can deliver to customers that no one else can? Then the next one is customer segments, which is we're not making a product for everybody. We're making it for a particular type of customer. So how do we define that? The last one is market category. Am I a robot or a self-driving car? So those are the 5 components. So I thought, okay, this is easy. Now we have 5 components. All I have to do is figure out the best answer for each one of these things. The first thing you'll notice when you split it apart like that is each component actually has a relationship to all of the others. So let's take any one of these things, value. The value that your product can deliver that no other product can is completely dependent on what? It's actually, yeah, well, it's actually, the value is completely dependent on your differentiated capabilities. Like, we don't get to just make it up. It comes from somewhere, either capabilities of the offering or capabilities of the company. But our differentiated capabilities are only differentiated when I compare them to a competitor. So those 3 things are all linked. I can't figure out one without figuring out another. And then the value, if I think about customer segments, who is the definition of my best fit customer? This is the customer that cares a lot about my value. These 2 things are linked. I can't pull them apart. And then the last one is market category. That's a little more esoteric, but your best market category, if we think about it like context, it's the context that I position my product in such that this value is kind of obvious to these customers I'm trying to go after. So if everything is dependent on everything else, how do I know where to start? And for 2 years, I decided, well, this is why we don't have a methodology for positioning. There is no place to start. It's a spiral. You just pick a spot, work your way around the circle. You get candidate positioning. We'll take that out to the market, test it. If it works, great, we run with it. If it doesn't work, we throw it out, we come back, we do it again. It was terrible. I did this for 2 years. And for 2 years, this is how it would work. I would get hired as the brand new VP marketing. I'd sell my CEO on this process. We're going to go do this thing. He'd say, great. And if we got it right the first time, I'm a hero. Everyone's like, good job. We're giving you a raise. We're so smart. We're glad we hired you. Amazing, April. If you get it wrong, then you've spent 2 months messing around on this thing, and now I have to go back to the CEO and say, oh, yeah, we got it wrong, actually, so we're going to throw that out and start again. It's a very good way to get fired. It's a super good way to get fired. So for 2 years, I did that. It was terrible. How I eventually got out of this mess is I started reading Clayton Christensen. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Clayton Christensen, but like he wrote a book called Competing Against Luck. And it's all about what is the job the customer is trying to get done. And so I did some thinking about this. I met some people that were experts on jobs to be done. And where I ended up was here. And the conclusion I took from that is that we actually have to start with competitive alternatives. If we don't start with competitive alternatives, what happens is we get positioning that sounds good in the office, but we take it outside the office and it doesn't work because we are insufficiently differentiated from the other alternatives in the market. So it actually works like this. Step 1 is, well, you know, who do we compete with? If we didn't exist, what would a customer do? Step 2 is, okay, well, what have we got that they don't have? That gives me my unique attributes or unique capabilities. Once I have those, I can go down that list, and for every capability, I can ask myself, so what? Why does a customer care? What is the value that a customer gets from that capability? That gives me value. Once I have value, then I can ask myself, well, what are the characteristics of a target customer that makes them really, really care a lot about the value only I can deliver? That's customers that care. And then the last one is market category. Again, what's the context I position this product in such that this value makes sense to these people? Now, it sounds easy, but there's 1,000 ways to mess this up. I'll tell you the most common one. The most common one is not really understanding your competitive alternatives. So what I get a lot is little tech companies will call me up and they'll say, April, we have this amazing thing. It's so cool. And I say, okay, who do you compete with? And they'll say, oh, you know, there's a bunch of competitors, and they'll give me a list, and it's a bunch of companies you've never heard of, like 2 guys in a basement in Silicon Valley somewhere, or like all these little guys. And I say, okay, and so how do you beat them? And they say, oh, ease of use. Ease of use. With those guys, it takes 59 clicks to do a thing. And with us, it only takes 2 clicks. So our value proposition is all around ease of use. We're way easier to use. And I'll say, okay, I never heard of any of those companies. Like, they sound like they're kind of small. Do you actually lose a deal to those companies? And most of the time they'll say, no, we never lose a deal to them. And I'll say, but do you win every deal you're in? No, of course not. So we lose about half the deals. Half the deals. Well, what do you lose to? And they'll say, we lose to no decision. So if there's no decision, how is the company actually solving the problem? They say, oh, well, they're just doing it with a spreadsheet or an intern or something. So you lose half your deals to the intern. So your real competition is the intern. And you're positioning on ease of use. Do you actually think you can beat the intern on ease of use? No way. The intern is the easiest thing to use ever. You say, Joey, get me a coffee. Fill out the spreadsheet. Come back when you're done. No, you're like the intern is super easy to use. So the first thing you have to understand is, who do I actually compete with? Most of the time, people do not consider the status quo as competition, but it is. If you want to go really deep on this, I wrote a book, and for $8, you can learn everything that I ever knew about positioning. What a world that we live in. It took me 20 years to figure that out. Now for $8. I'm going to tell you this story. I worked at a company in the customer relationship management space, CRM. Today, the big player in that space is Salesforce. But back when I was in this space, there was a giant company in Silicon Valley called Siebel that was the king of this enterprise CRM space. An amazing company, amazing. Absolutely dominating the market. We were a tiny, tiny little startup in Canada that was not dominating the market in any way, but we were the same. So we also positioned ourselves as enterprise CRM. And so unsurprisingly, every time we went into a meeting with a customer, we would say, hi, we do enterprise CRM. And they'd say, that's great. How are you better than Siebel? And the reality was, we weren't better than Siebel in any way, really. Like, I mean, they had 400 customers. We had 4. They did $2 billion revenue. We were doing a little under $2 million revenue. They had 8,000 employees. I was employee number 20. But we did have one thing that they didn't have, and it was this feature. And it was, we could model relationships in a different way than they modeled relationships. And it looked really good in the product. So we always showed it to customers. So we'd show it, and the customers would go, ooh, that looks nice. The only problem was, we didn't understand what the value of that feature was. So we understood the competitor, Siebel. We understood our differentiated capability, this feature. We had no clue what the value was. So we'd get in a meeting, we'd show the feature, and the customer would go, that looks cool. What do you do with that? And we'd say, anything you want. And then they would look confused, and then we would hit them with our other differentiated thing, which was absolute desperation to close some business. And so we would discount the software until it was practically free just to get people to try and buy things, which actually didn't work very well. So needless to say, things were not going well. How we got out of this situation was more luck than anything else. So how it actually worked was, we hired a new sales rep. So we had a hard time keeping salespeople because they couldn't sell anything, so they would quit. And so we had a new sales rep coming in for an interview, and my CEO was notoriously mean in interviews, particularly to salespeople. I don't know why, but that was his thing. So this sales rep came in, and my CEO was interviewing him, and my CEO leaned across the table, and he said, why should I hire you to be a sales rep at my amazing software company? And this sales rep was from New York, so he had a little bit of attitude. So he leaned over in my CEO's face and he said, I'll tell you why you should hire me, because my best friend is the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs, and I'm going to get you a sales meeting there. And we were like, start Monday. So we hired the guy. And then he got us the meeting with the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs. I tagged along for the meeting because I just wanted to see, what does the office of the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs look like? And you know what it looks like? It looks like this room, basically. And there's a helicopter pad outside. That's actually true. So we went to the meeting, and my sales rep is very good, it turns out. He does a very good demo. He gets to the part where he's demoing this special feature, and the head of investment banking is super excited. He says, wait, stop. So if two people used to work together, but they don't work together anymore, but they sit on a board together, you could model that. We're like, yeah. He said, if two people belong to a golf club together, you could model that. We're like, yeah. He said, wait, I need to get the vice president. Runs down the hall, comes back with a couple of guys, and he says, show them the thing. So we showed the demo, and they're excited too. They're like, wait, so if they used to go to school together, and then they work together, but then later they sit on a board together, you could model all of that. And we said, yeah, we can. And they started jumping up and down, speaking their weird banker language, and we were in the corner going, have you ever been in a room with a bunch of excited investment bankers? Terrifying. Anyway, so we closed the deal on the spot. So we're super excited. This has never happened to us before. And we had this thought, maybe investment bankers love our stuff. So we get a meeting with Merrill Lynch, and the same thing happens. We show them the thing, bankers are jumping up and down, we close a deal. This is amazing. Importantly, though, it made us think about our positioning. So we went back to the office and said, maybe we're not enterprise CRM. Maybe we're CRM for investment banks. Now, that might not sound like a big change to you, but internally, this was a big decision. So you know who really hated it? The investors. So the investors looked at that and said, wait, how many investment banks are there in the world? Like, if you're just going to sell to investment banks, like, we gave you the money to obliterate Siebel from the face of the earth. Now you're saying you're just going to do this little thing? How are we going to make money doing that? And so how we convinced them is we said, look, positioning is not a thing that you just do once and you never touch again. So what we said was, look, we're going to sell to investment banks first, because let's face it, we're not selling anywhere else right now. It's not like we're giving anything up. So we're going to sell to investment banks. Once we have established ourselves in investment banks, then we're going to start selling to retail banks, because they're kind of the same. And then once we do that, then we won't be CRM for investment banks anymore. We'll be CRM for banking. After we do that, then we're going to start selling to insurance companies, and that's going to be CRM for financial services. We'll adjust it then. And if we're successful at doing that, that's a giant industry, and then we'll be a great big company, and then we're going to go compete directly with Siebel and take them out. And so the investors agreed, and we shifted the positioning. And it was a complete change in the fortunes of the company. So we went from 2 million revenue to a little under 80 million revenue in 18 months. And the best part was we never got in a head-to-head battle against Siebel again. So we would come in and we'd say, we're CRM for investment banks, and the bankers would look at us like, wait, so don't you compete with Siebel? And we'd say, oh, Siebel. We love those guys. They're so smart. They're so big. They're so amazing. We love them. They're like the world's greatest general purpose CRM for like call centers and retailers. Not you, Wolf of Wall Street. You need something special. Let me show you the thing. And then we would just win the deal, and they'd never see them again. The end of this story is that we started growing so fast that Siebel got annoyed with us beating them everywhere around Wall Street, and then we went to London and did the investment banks in Europe, and so they came and acquired us for $1.7 billion. That was a fun meeting with the board. They were all like, how are you going to make money? And we're like, that's how we're going to make money, right there. I have one more thing I want to talk about, which is trends. So I get asked about this a lot, in particular right now because of ChatGPT and machine learning and AI. So I get asked about the difference between market categories and trends. And I think this is a really important concept. So I thought I'd touch on that quickly. So do you know this company Pantone? They're like the color people. And so they analyze colors and trends. And every year they put out a press release, and it's the Pantone color of the year. This year is Viva Magenta, which is this color here. And so they announce it, that's the color of the year, this is trendy, you know, and then what happens is we get all kinds of magenta stuff. Like the next thing you know, there's magenta pants and jackets and lipstick, and you can buy a magenta couch and all kinds of things. And here's the difference here, right? If I make a magenta couch because magenta is trendy, I'm still in the couch business. But what I've done is produced a couch that aligns with this trend, which is kind of, you know, makes me cool right now. Now, when we think about this in tech, for example, we often confuse market categories with trends. So market categories would be things like marketing automation is a market category, CRM is a market category, accounting software, security systems, these are market categories. But there are trends that apply across all those categories. And you know, if I look back 5 years ago, it was cloud, we were all talking about cloud. AR, virtual reality, that was is still a trend now. Machine learning, blockchain was a big trend, it's still going on. And so it matters, but it matters in a way that maybe you're not thinking about. So the big thing is that buyers don't want to get left behind. So they start seeing this stuff in the media and at conferences, because let's face it, there's only so many talks we can do about accounting software. It's really, really boring. But if I come up and say, hey, the new thing is machine learning with accounting software, you'll come to that session. That's interesting. Let's learn about that. Customers will get inundated with these messages, and this is going on right now with ChatGPT and a lot of the AI stuff, and they'll be worried. They don't want to get left behind. And so there's worried there's some potential threat to their business. So you're selling accounting software, but then that customer is like, yeah, but what about that AI stuff? What are you doing with that AI? And so it's good if you have a response to that, then you might be able to get at some of that budget that potentially the customer has set aside to dabble in the new thing. So here's how it works. We have your solution, your product, and you still have to position that in a market category. Otherwise, I don't know what you are. But if you can loop in a trend, then that makes it kind of spicy. It's hot. So it's kind of the answer to the question, why pay attention to this right now? So here's how this works. You don't have to be trendy. You don't. I spent a lot of years marketing database software. There's nothing cool about databases. There never was. But we still did hundreds of millions of revenue on it because, you know, it doesn't have to be cool. But if you can loop something in, you could spice it up. So this is an example of a company I did some work with. They're called Redgate Software, and they do database tools. That's even more boring than just databases. It's like tools for databases. It's so boring. This company has been very, very successful selling database tools. They have 800,000 active users of their stuff. But 5 or 6 years ago, they noticed a trend. When their salespeople were calling into accounts, the companies would say, oh, actually, we don't want to buy database tools this year because we have all of our budgets reserved for this thing called the DevOps transformation. This was like a hot thing with tech guys. It still is, but 5 years ago, really hot. And so they decided that eventually this was bad for their business. And when they looked at the DevOps transformation, they're like, why is nobody thinking about how this impacts your database and therefore the tools on your database? So they developed a point of view, and they called it something. They called it database DevOps. And so when people called in, they say, well, we're doing a DevOps transformation. And they said, well, yeah, have you thought about how databases fit into that? Because that's actually really important. The next thing you know, they're doing talks at conferences. They're writing op-ed articles and all the techie email distribution lists, and all of a sudden, what they see is they become hot because now they're associated with this DevOps trend. The result of that is their inbound leads increased 10 times. And the second thing was that they went from selling, they have a suite of 13 different tools. On average, before they started talking about database DevOps, they were selling 1.5 products per deal. Now they sell 5.5 products per deal because they can wrap the things together in this database DevOps thing. So if you're going to be in here, it's okay to be at the bottom and be kind of boring, but if you can leverage the trend, that can actually spice things up. Now, where you get into real trouble is when you're in the other quadrants. So sometimes you'll see companies, they get so excited about the trend that they actually forget to position in the market. So they're just talking about the trend, and what that is it sounds cool, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's baffling. So I'll give you an example of this. I had these guys call me from Silicon Valley. Actually, again, it was the investor called me and said, nobody can understand what these people do. You should get them on the phone. So they got on the phone, and there's so many founders. There were like 7 of them, and we were all on the video call. So there's 7 little heads, all one camera. And I said, so what do you do? And they said, we're the sharing economy for pets. I was like, I don't know what that is. And they're like, we're the sharing economy. They say it louder. We're the sharing economy for pets. And I'm like, are we sharing the pets? Because I have a dog, and he's very small. He's too small to share. And they're like, no, dummy, that's not it at all. We're just sharing economy for pets. And I'm like, I know you keep saying that, but I don't know what that is. And eventually the CEO got very frustrated, and he told the other 6 guys, he said, don't just shut up. I'm going to tell this dummy Canadian what this is. So he gets right in the camera, and he says, okay, this is what it is. It's Uber for cats. And I was like in my office, and I kind of had a little daydream. I was like, I wonder what he thinks I think when he says that. What could that possibly be? Uber for cats. And I was like, oh, the geniuses of Silicon Valley, they have taught the cats how to drive. And they're going to be like, with their little paws and the thing. And I was like, you guys don't need my help. That's amazing. Send those cats over to my house right now. And the guy got really, really mad. And he said, no. And what he explained, you know what it was? It's a service you can order a dog groomer on your phone to come to your house. That's what it is. It's a 2-sided marketplace for pet services. But this is the problem. Like, Uber is not a market category. And so if you say I'm Uber for something, well, it assumes that I know what that means. And it assumes that I'm thinking about Uber the same way you're thinking about Uber, but it's not. So don't do this. This is very bad. The other side is where we got a market that we're talking about, and we have the trends. We're very excited about the trends. We just forgot about our product in the middle of that. And this is what we call bull crap or lies. Another way. So my favorite example of this is, have you ever heard of this company called Long Island Iced Tea? They make iced tea. It's a nice beverage. And for some reason, they were listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange, but the iced tea business wasn't very good. So their stock is going down, down, down. And so they got a call from the stock exchange, said, look, your stock price is too low, so we're going to delist you, kick you off the exchange, unless your price goes up. So they were desperate. They tried some things. Nothing worked. And so what they did was they put out a press release, and they said, look, we're changing our name. We're not going to be Long Island Iced Tea anymore. We're going to be Long Blockchain. And that's it. Like, there was nothing else in the press release. It didn't say how they were using blockchain or what they were going to do with blockchain. They just said, we're changing the name. It's Long Blockchain. So I'm reading this, like it hit the news, and I was like, well, that's just stupid. Nobody's going to fall for that. Like, and everybody fell for it. So the stock went way up, like 400% increase in the stock. Everybody jumped in. Everyone's buying it. The stock pickers are going crazy. They're like, we don't know what it is, but it's blockchain. So everybody's excited. And I was depressed for a week. I thought, I've been giving people bad advice. Like, they should just stick blockchain on there, and that's it. The stock will go up 1 million times, and, you know, went to the bar and had a conversation with the bartender. I'm like, maybe I need to find something else to do, you know, anyways. And so it stayed up too for like 2 weeks. But then what happened is all the stock pickers started to realize, oh no, like they're not announcing anything else. Maybe there isn't anything here. And so the stock pickers are calling Long Island Iced Tea, and their strategy was to just not talk to anybody. So like occasionally they would pick up the phone by mistake, and the reporters would be like, what's the blockchain strategy? And they would say, oh, you're breaking up. I can't hear you. Blockchain. Just like this. And so what eventually happened is 3 weeks later, all the people that bought the stock because they thought there was something blockchain going on there sold the stock. And then all the people that bought the stock because they thought the iced tea business was good sold the stock because obviously these people are insane. And so then the stock went down to zero. They got kicked off the stock exchange. But I felt better. That's the end of that story. Yeah. Anyways, that's it. So, you know, where you want to be is at the intersection of these three things. If you could do that, then you're doing a good thing. That's the end. That's all I have for you. And I think we're going to do questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, April. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On y va. Obviously awesome, on y va tous? Allez, on y va. Obviously awesome.
It's hard to
once
say,
again,
I think,
once
if you're
again.
francophone. Obviously awesome.
Great, OK. Évidemment génial.
Évidemment génial.
Voilà. Super. On va passer à une partie de questions. Je vais vous demander de jouer le jeu, de lever la main. Je vois Marc qui a levé la main là-bas. Est-ce qu'on pourrait passer un micro à Marc?
And he can, you don't have to do it in English, he can translate.
You can do it in English or in French.
Whatever you
to
prefer.
you. À Marc. Ensuite, il y a Pascaline qui a levé la main. J'ai vu Sophie aussi lever la main. Non, il y en a qui disent non, 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 pas moi. Marc.
Merci April. Alors, je n'ai pas trouvé le positionnement de mon accent anglais, donc je vais la faire en français.
OK.
Déjà, merci de nous éclairer, de nous faire réfléchir en sourire.
What's
With
that?
love.
Okay. Thank
With
you
love.
for helping us to think about things.
Oh, good.
Smiling.
Yeah,
Thank you so
great.
much.
You're welcome.
Et la question, c'est sur l'ikigai qu'on a vu, sur les 3 axes pour avoir le bon positionnement. Quels sont les 3 mots-clés à apporter à un CEO pour qu'il nous accompagne et nous permette d'investir dans le positionnement?
Sorry.
Okay, I can help you. Based on the ikigai things, the three
things,
steps,
yeah.
what are the key hashtags to help people to convince the CEO?
To convince the CEO. So I get this question a lot because marketing often feels that the CEO controls the positioning. And even if they think the positioning is weak or bad, sometimes the CEO is not convinced. And so the way I've done this when I was internal as a vice president of marketing is if it's a B2B product and you have a sales team, if the positioning is weak, the sales team will be feeling it because it's very hard to sell a weakly positioned product. And so what I would do is I would go to sales and I would listen in on sales calls. And weak positioning on a sales call sounds like this. You know, your rep is doing the demo, it's going very good. They get to maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the pitch, and the customer's making this face like this. And then they'll be like, back up, just back up. Go back to the beginnings. Do it again. Go back for the beginning and do it again. And so you'll have this thing where the customer is just not quite sure what it is. That's one thing. The second thing you'll hear is the customer will say, oh, yeah, I know what you are. I know exactly what you are. You're just like Microsoft Teams. And you're not. You're nothing like Microsoft Teams. And so they're comparing you to something that you should not be compared with. The third one you'll get that's a sign of weak positioning is people will say, I get it, I get what it is, and I get who you compete with. I just don't understand why anybody would pay for that. So they don't understand your value. So if you hear those things, then you should be able to go to the head of sales and say, look, I'm hearing these things. In marketing, we call this positioning. Have we ever formally looked at the positioning here? And if the head of sales says no, and you can convince the head of sales that positioning is maybe weak, then you can go to the CEO and say, it's a sales problem. And generally, the CEO is very interested in fixing sales problems. So if the vice president of sales can come in with you and say, not necessarily that we're going to change it, we're just going to look at it, then I think you're halfway home if you can convince the CEO to just look at it. The trick is if you are going to look at it, you need a process to actually do it. You can't just get everybody together in a room and have a brainstorming session, because what will happen is the CEO will just dominate that discussion and you'll walk out with the same positioning you walked in with. So what you actually need is a process. Like, again, the way I would recommend it is this: well, let's start by looking at alternatives. Then we'll talk about what have we got that the alternatives don't have, and then how does that translate to value? And often when we get to that step, our value proposition is very different than what we're currently saying on the website or what we're currently saying in sales calls.
Merci, ça va mieux, Marc? C'est bon? Super. Thank you so much, April. I've got maybe... Who raise the hand? J'ai pas vu. Merci. Voilà. Bonjour, votre prénom?
Bonjour, Olivia.
Olivia. Pouvez-vous lever, Olivia? Merci beaucoup. Merci.
How do you explain that generally company starts with customer needs and not alternatives when they try to think about this methodology?
Right. So so here's the thing. When we're building the product for the first time, so we're working on something new, then we obviously start with customer needs and customer problems, and then we're figuring out the positioning from there, and then trying to build a product that meets those requirements. The problem is once we're in market, we can't necessarily start with the problem in our positioning, because most of the time there are multiple different solutions that solve the same problem. In B2B, this is very much a big problem. Like, I can't say, hey, I'm selling accounting software, and your problem is you can't do accounting. Well, every accounting software solves that problem. So what we really have to figure out is what is our differentiated value, which is very different from just answering the question, what's our value? So one of the biggest problems I see in B2B marketing is if you look at what the sales team is doing and the marketing team is messaging around, is they're assuming the question is, why pick us? But that is not the question we have to answer to win business. The question we have to answer to win business is, why pick us over everybody else? So we can't just go in with straight problems. It's true, but most of the time, what we actually need to do is contextualize our differentiated value, which is very different, which often then what we're actually talking about is our insight into the problem. So it's the problem behind the problem. It's our point of view on the problem, which is different than our competitors. That's what makes this really, really hard, in my opinion.
I've got a question for you. Many people over there are working for international companies, and the positioning is made in the US. How can we change the positioning for local markets?
Yeah, so I worked at IBM for a bunch of years, and so the products I had were very international and in different markets. Often, if we looked at the different markets, the positioning wasn't as different in different markets as we thought it was going to be. And so we would do this exercise. We'd start with the competitive alternatives, and sometimes we get a market like Asia where the competitors are completely different. So we would say, well, the competitors are different, therefore our differentiated capabilities are different, therefore the value is different. We would start with that assumption, but almost always, when we got to the value, it was the same. So even though the competitors might be different, what we had that was differentiating was the same. Now, if it wasn't, then we would have to fork the positioning, and we would have positioning for Asia versus positioning for North America. The biggest change that we did, like the core positioning would stay the same, but we would have local treatment of messaging and campaigns. And that's where we could tap into particular trends that were happening in the market that were different, or things that we thought were specific in the market. But if you looked at the underpinning of the positioning, it actually wasn't that different most of the time. But sometimes you do have a thing where there's a very strong competitor in a certain geography, then you have to take that into account in your positioning.
Okay. Sophie avait une question là-bas. Je crois si on peut lui passer le micro. Merci. N'hésitez pas, il reste quelques minutes, donc profitez-en. Soyez gourmands et gourmandes. Ça sera sympa. Sophie.
Yes, thank you for the talk. It was great. Could you give us some common example of mistakes done when you try to position your product?
Yeah, so many. So let me give you a few. So the first one is the one that I mentioned in the talk, that people don't fully understand the competitors. And in particular, they don't take into account status quo as a competitor. So they're only looking at things that compete directly against them, not thinking about status quo, when we lose a lot of deals to status quo. Again, in B2B, about half deals, typical companies will lose about half their business to a decision to stick with the status quo. The second most common thing is, particularly in tech companies, is they're actually not that clear on value. So they're messaging too much around features or capabilities and not enough around the value or why the features matter. This is very common in tech, particularly when you have technical CEOs. They fall in love with the technology. You're seeing it right now in AI, where people are talking about things that are very, very complicated, but consumers are sitting back going, yeah, but what do we use it for? Like, what's the value of it? Like, we need to understand what the value is. And everyone's like, but it's so cool, you know. And eventually, we're going to have to really hone in on the value of that. The other thing is, the next most common thing is segmentation. So they're not actually really thinking about who is the best fit customer for this thing. In B2B, that's super important, like getting really, really tight on a definition of these are accounts that we are very likely to close, and this is what their characteristics are, versus trying to be everything for everybody. Like in B2B, that's a very fast way to go out of business, trying to be everything for everybody. So being very clear on this is our value, these are the kind of companies that really care about that value, and this is why. The clearer you can get on that, the better your positioning is going to be. Weak positioning generally comes from not being clear on who the competitors are, not really being clear on what the value is, or not really being clear on who's our best fit customer for this thing.
Great. Last but not least, the question.
Do you think it's possible to change the product positioning after 5 or 6 years?
Yeah.
Of history of the company?
Yeah, so not only, like, if tech companies are a good example of this, because in tech, most of the time we have a plan in advance to change the positioning. So typically what we have in tech companies is we have a vision. And that's what we sold to the venture capitalists. So we have this vision of this thing, what our product will be in 10 years, which is the all singing, all dancing, amazing thing. And then we have the thing right now, which is not that. But usually what we have is a plan. And so in the plan, it'll say, look, today we're positioned like this, but in 2 years, we will have this additional capabilities, and that will enable us to position like this, and then we'll be this, and then we'll be this, and eventually we'll be this thing. So if you look at examples like Salesforce is a great example. When Salesforce first launched, they were positioned as CRM for small businesses. Everyone forgets this. So they only sold to very, very small businesses. Their target market was companies with a sales team fewer than 10 people. And so their big differentiated value was all the other CRMs on the market, you needed an IT department to actually deploy the software because it was on-premise software. Their differentiation was it was software as a service, so no software, and they could do that. If you look at the way Salesforce is positioned now, they've gone way, way up market. They're doing much broader thing than just CRM. So that positioning has really shifted over the years. In the companies that I've worked for, it's a little hard to predict when the positioning is going to shift, but it'll shift for all kinds of reasons. So once I worked at a company and we had a strategic relationship with another database company, and we positioned around that, but then they got acquired by Oracle. And so, we called the emergency positioning meeting, sat down, messed with our positioning, adjusted it, and that worked really well for like 6 months. And then the company that acquired the company themselves got acquired by another company, and we're like, oh no, and then we had to go back and do it all over again. So we positioned 3 times in a year and a half. I've had other products that I've worked on where the positioning, we just sort of grew with as the market grew. And the very first product I ever worked on and repositioned got acquired 3 times, and it's now part of SAP. And if you look at the page for that product, it's 20 years old, and the positioning hasn't really changed all that much. So I think generally we plan for it to change, but sometimes it doesn't. So I think the important thing is you're checking in on it to see whether or not it needs to, because the competitive landscape has changed, or your differentiated capabilities have changed, meaning the competitors have caught up with you, or you've built something that takes you into a new market or enables you to do something different value-wise. The important thing is to look at it, because it will change over time, generally.
Thank you very much, April. Thank you. You can all rise up,
Okay.
please. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was obviously awesome. Thank you, April.
Thank
you
you
so much. Merci beaucoup. Merci, à très vite. Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous.